4 short weeks, the Occupy movement has tapped a deep well of discontent in this country and mobilized thousands coast to coast. Now, a few signs that it might also be changing the nation's political direction. In our third story tonight, the indications the Occupy movement could already be moving the political needle, if ever so slightly to the left, as some top members of the Obama administration say they hear the protesters' message and are considering tightening the rules on big banks. Treasury Secretary Geithner, who has long faced criticism for perceived sympathy to Wall Street, saying on CNBC today that he plans to deliver on the administration's promise of financial reform, claiming that, in fact, he already has.
You've seen very, very dramatic enforcement actions already by the enforcement authorities across the U.S. government, and I'm sure you're going to see more to come. You should stay tuned for that.
Meantime, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton echoing that message, telling a group of Manhattan business leaders today they are not off the hook, saying, quote, the protests ought to be a reminder to all of us that we have a great deal of work to do to live up to the expectations of the American people. This after several high-ranking congressional Democrats, including the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, pledged their support for the protest. Still, that could be in the hopes of advancing their own causes, winning the upcoming elections, per se. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the House Democrats' fundraising arm, now circulating a petition asking supporters to join them and, quote, stand with the Occupy Wall Street protests. That was fast. Joining me now, Countdown contributor Markos Moulitsas, of course, the founder and publisher of Daily Kos. Markos, good evening.
Good evening. Happy Friday.
And to you, sir. What do you make of the Geithner comments about expecting regulation? I mean, didn't he sort of undercut himself when he said he'd already put harsh regulations in place, apparently the invisible kind that nobody knows about?
Yeah, I'm actually happy that they're being forced to talk about this. It's much easier to ignore and hope that this goes away. And I think they're realizing it's not going away, so they have to hit it head on. And I'm happy that he says, stay tuned, things are going to happen. But when he says dramatic things have already happened, I mean, you know what? His definition of dramatic clearly is a lot different than mine, because I haven't seen anything that would even remotely come close to being called dramatic. So if we're going to get more of the same, then I'm not that excited. But if he's just trying to hint that there actually will be real action ahead of us, then that's a positive. I'm just not holding my breath right now. And
the Secretary of State's quote that the protests ought to be a reminder to all of us that we have, note the us and the we, have a great deal of work to do to live up to the expectations of the American people. That seems like it's slightly above kind of boilerplate. Translate that to who's the we? Who's this we, Kemosabe? Is she referring to herself and Wall Street, or just Wall Street, or who?
Well, that actually is a lot more encouraging, I have to say.
Okay.
When we talk about I mean, it's funny to me for a movement that's been criticized as not having demand. What does it stand for? People know what it stands for. I mean, there's no doubt what it stands for. I mean, and Hillary doesn't need to see a list of demands to know what this is all about. And those business leaders she was talking to don't need a list of demands to know what Hillary Clinton is talking about. They all know exactly what this is all about. And the fact is that they're going to have to pay more attention to it. And if nothing else, this is what this movement has really been all about.
What about the fundraiser from the petition from the DCCC? I mean, is that a little disingenuous, or is there a silver lining in that, or how do you read that one?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is they're trying to maybe co-opt the movement. That's a little crass and a little unseemly. On the other hand, they're kind of tying themselves to this movement. Yeah. So it gets a lot harder for themselves to try to carry Wall Street's water after they've sat there and said, we're in solidarity with Occupy Wall Street. Not that they won't try, don't get me wrong. Right. The crassness is not outside of the realm of politics. But, you know, in the past, what would happen is that they would run away from those dirty hippies, right? Oh, hippies, go away. The fact that they're not, the fact that they're trying to find ways to use this to their advantage actually is a long-term good.
Having looked at this landscape, obviously politicians do not have to believe in something or even like it to advocate it or to get it done. I mean, it's nice when they do that. It's kind of sweet in an old-fashioned what they're supposed to be there for way. But being scared of it is sufficient, and it really can change. We're not Great Britain. But last spring, if you had told everybody that by fall there'd be 83 different investigations of Rupert Murdoch, that the tide had turned from a Rupert Murdoch teat-sucking community into a let's see if we can put him in jail community in a matter of 3 months, nobody would have believed you. Could it possibly move that dramatically in this country on something of far more substance than whether or not Rupert Murdoch is, you know, a bad guy and a bad influence on society?
Heck, if 3 months ago you had asked me or had told me that there would be this mass movement that was fixated on substance, not nonsense, right? Not the usual media crap, but actually substantive movement that was focused on income inequality and the excesses of Wall Street, and that it was starting to get attention politicians, I probably would have laughed. I would have said, that's really optimistic and cute, but really, that doesn't happen in this America. Well, it's happening, and that's what's so excited about this, is that this is actually truly a movement based on substance, based on something more than death panels or, notions of Obama wants to take away my guns and freedom. And this is actually based on empirical evidence that shows that the American people are not getting ahead except for that really tiny 1%. And to me, what's amazing about this is that Americans are getting the message, they're embracing it, and you even have people in that 1%. I mean, there's this great site, We Are the 1% Stand With You. I forget the exact URL. Yeah. But basically, it's people who are saying, yeah, no, we're one of those lucky 1%, and, this isn't fair. This is not what America is all about, and we stand with you. We stand with that 99%.
We'll see. Countdown contributor and the founder and publisher of Daily Kos, Markos Moulitsas, great thanks. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow, Occupy and all the related protest groups plan to act in unison around the world. The potential there with activist and comedian Jamie Kilstein. Next. Yeah, let's see you do that against Bloomberg. Our cousins have much to teach us. Beyond Italy, the United for Global Change website features posters in many languages. According to the New York Times, protesters in London hope to occupy the stock exchange. Our cousins there have many things to teach us. In France, they want to march from the stock exchange to the central city square. Meanwhile, back here in New York, an Occupy event planned for Times Square at 5 p.m. Its promotional poster designed by Shepard Fairey, who was behind Barack Obama's Hope graphic during the 2008 campaign. That's how quickly things change. Let's bring in Jamie Kilstein, the activist, comedian, co-host of Citizen Radio, who's visited Zuccotti Park several times while covering these protests. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing all this coverage.
Of course. It's news, and theoretically, we're supposed to be covering the news.
I hear that,
yeah,
and then when I turn to other stations, I forget that.
I know. It's Zolindra was the news, apparently, today. I missed it. Is it more correct, as we look at this worldwide phenomenon, to say that Occupy Wall Street is actually the American version of the European protests?
I definitely think they have a lot of similar grievances when it comes to austerity. We'll know for sure if in 5 years, Brooklyn hipsters are saying, oh, I like the European protests a lot more. Yes. But I'm just excited that for the first time in so long, the entire world has solidarity with America. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember during all of George Bush's administration, I'd go to perform overseas, and people would be like, where are you from? And I'm like, America, or Canada, or whatever. And now, you go over there and they're proud. You hear people in Egypt who have gone through, so much. Cite us as inspiration.
Activist and comedian Jamie Kilstein, great thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Special comment that was written and aired for one purpose now has a new meaning and a new context. It's next. This is Countdown. My special comment on Occupy on October 14th would be virtually the same as the one I made in the wake of the ludicrous debt deal on August 1st. So rather than rephrase myself, let me repeat myself with a few edits for time. Our government has now given up the concept of right and wrong. We have in this deal declared that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all political incumbents are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are renomination, re-election, and the pursuit of hypocrisy. We have in this deal gone from the 4 freedoms to the 4 great hypocrisies. We have superseded Congress to facilitate $750 billion in domestic cuts, including Medicare, in order to end an artificially induced political hostage crisis over debt originating from the bills run up by a Republican president who funneled billions of taxpayer dollars to the military-industrial complex by unfunded, unnecessary, and unproductive wars, enabled in doing so by the very same Republican leaders who now cry for balanced budgets, and we have called it compromise. And those who defend it have called it a credit to a pragmatic president who wins some sort of political points, because having stood for almost nothing here, he gave away almost nothing for which he stood. It would be comical if it were not tragic. Either way, it is a signal moment in our history in which both parties have agreed and codified that the political structure of this nation shall now be based entirely on hypocrisy and political self-perpetuation. And of what value would this mandated balanced budget be? Our own history proves that at a time of economic crisis, if the businesses aren't spending and the consumers aren't spending, the government must spend. Our ancestors were the lab rats in the horrible experiments of the Hoover administration that brought on the Great Depression, in which the government curled up into a ball while it simultaneously insisted the economy should heal itself, when, in times of crisis, then and now, the economy turns out to be comprised entirely of a bunch of rich people who will sit on their money no matter if the country starves. The fourth of the great hypocrisies is the evident agreement to not add any revenues to the process of cutting. Not only is the impetus to make human budget sacrifices out of the poor and dependent formalized, but the rich and the corporations are thus indemnified again and given more money not merely to spend on themselves and their own luxuries, but more vitally, they are given more money to spend on buying politicians, buying legislatures, buying courts, buying entire states, all of which can be directed like so many weapons in the service of one cause and one cause alone, making by statute and ruling the further protection of the wealthy at the expense of everybody else, untouchable, inviolable, permanent. The White House today boasted of loopholes to be closed and tax breaks to be rescinded later by a committee that is yet to be formed. There are no new taxes except the stealth ones enacted on 99 out of 100 Americans by this evil transaction. Every dollar cut from the safety net is another dollar added to the citizen's cost for education, for security, for health, for life itself. It is another dollar he can't spend on making a better life for himself, or at least his children. It is another dollar he must spend instead on simply keeping himself alive. Where is the outrage over these great hypocrisies? Do you expect it to come from a corrupt and corrupted media for whom access is of greater importance than criticizing the failure of a political party or defending those who don't buy newspapers or can't leap website paywalls or could not afford cable TV? Do you expect it to come from a cynical and manipulative political structure? Do you expect it from those elected officials who no longer know anything of government or governance, but only perceive how to get elected or how to pose in front of a camera and pretend to be leaders? Do you expect it from politicians themselves who will merely calculate whether or not it's right based on whether or not it will get them more contributions? Do you expect it will come from the great middle ground of this country, with a population obsessed with entertainment, video games, social media, sports, and trivia? Where is the outrage to come from? From you. It will do no good to wait for the politicians to suddenly atone for their sins. They're too busy trying to keep their jobs to do their jobs. It will do no good to wait for the media to suddenly remember its origins as the free press, the watchdog of democracy envisioned by Jefferson. They are too busy trying to get exclusive details about exactly how the bank robbers emptied the public's pockets to give a damn about telling anybody what they looked like or which way they went. It will do no good to wait for the apolitical public to get a clue. They can't hear the clue through all the chatter and scandal and diversion and delusion and illusion. The betrayal of what this nation is supposed to be about did not begin with this deal, and it surely will not end with this deal. There is a tide pushing back the rights of each of us, and it has been artificially induced by union bashing and the sowing of hatreds and fears, and now this ever more institutionalized economic battering of the average American. It will continue and it will crush us, because those who created it are organized and unified and hell-bent. And the only response is to be organized and unified and hell-bent in return. We must find again the energy and the purpose of the 1960s and early 1970s, and we must protest this deal and all the goddamn deals to come in the streets. We must arise non-violently but insistently. General strikes, boycotts, protests, sit-ins, non-cooperation, takeovers. But modern versions of that resistance, facilitated and amplified by a weapon our predecessors did not have, the glory that is instantaneous communication. It is from an old and almost cliched motion picture that the wisdom comes. First, you've got to get mad. I cannot say to you, meet here or there at this hour or that one, and we'll peacefully break the back of government that now exists merely to get its functionaries reelected. But I can say that the time is coming when the window for us to restore the control of our government to ourselves will close, and we had damn well better act before then. Because this deal is more than a tipping point in which the government goes from defending the safety net to gutting it. This is wrong. And while our government has now declared that it has given up the concept of right and wrong, you and I have not and will not do so. Good night and good luck.